Thank you, Diego. Thank you very much for the invitation. I didn't understand very much because I don't speak Portuguese, so we have to do it in English now. But it's nice to be together with all of you. So I hope you can understand what I'm going to talk about. Um, it's about our attempts to communicate with extraterrestrials. So I'm going to talk about three more or less historical attempts from the point of view of nowadays. Um, the the Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 plates, the Voyager 1 and 2 golden disk records, and the Arecibo message. Those are the three historical attempts to send messages to extraterrestrials. And the interesting thing about those messages, from my point of view, is that that it's a special form of communication, of an attempt to communicate, which is quite different to our normal communication. So there are certain special circumstances. First of all, it's a technical communication. It's not a direct encounter with extraterrestrials, with aliens. It's an attempt to send with technical means messages, and it's a one-way communication in the sense that we are trapped on Earth in time and space because all the other planets are so far away from us that it takes thousands of years, even for messages that travel with the speed of light, thousands, several thousands of years, many thousands of years to reach another galaxy, for example, and to to find a receiver for this message and to receive an answer. Um, we can't expect to receive answers within our own lifetimes. So that's the special situation. And the other very special thing about is that it we that we don't know actually the receiver of the message. So we have to speculate a lot who could be the receiver of the message. We, of course, we expect that it has to be somehow what we call intelligent, and it has to to really have the wish to communicate with us and not hide from us, and it has to have the wish to understand what we are sending, because without this wish to understand what they probably receive, they would never understand what's going on. And that all is going on with advanced technology. So from the point of view of the famous Shannon communication model from the from the 1940s, where we have a information we want to send, then we have to code this information, of course, before we can send this into certain sign systems, and then send the sign systems, transfer it to signals, send the signals, and on the other side, there has to be somebody who is decoding those signals and making sense out of it. And the special situation here is that we don't have any idea about the other side, about the receiver of this message. So the interesting thing about this form of communication for me is that we are not learning very much about extraterrestrials because we don't have a real communication going on. It's more, it's even more sending like a letter to somewhere and not like a phone call, because we can't expect to receive an answer. So we don't really learn about something about extraterrestrials. We but, and that's what it makes it interesting for me, we can learn a lot about us and about humans and about our imaginations about what is life, uh, what could be alternative epistemologies. So are there alternatives to the human concepts of understanding the world? Um, are there alternatives, and how would they look like to our semiotic cultures, to our forms of languages, to our science systems we have developed, and things like that? So um, also the question of the general notion of life in the universe. As it, can we imagine different forms of life, and how would they be like, and would it be possible to at all to communicate with those different forms of life? So that makes it's from this standpoint much more interesting, thinking about us than thinking about the extraterrestrials. Um, there are two programs. One is called SETI, the SETI program, which is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. So we are listening, we are listening to the space, whether there are signals from outside that, or attempts from outside to communicate with us. That's the SETI program, listening to the space. And the METI program is the program where we send messages to extraterrestrials. So I'm going to talk more about the messaging side and not to the listening side. And it's very clear, of course, from what I have said up to now, is that what we are doing at the moment, or what we have been doing in the past, is that we actually um, we just see and things, we just see distorted images of ourselves. That's so when we send messages and imagine who could be the receiver always is somehow a distorted image of ourselves. And the question is, can we expand this image, or does it have to be so simple as it had been in the examples I'm going to show now, the three historical examples, which from my point of view are really under-complex. As you will see in a few moments, there are so many assumptions in it that we can't really expect that any extraterrestrial would understand what we are going to mean with those messages. So the first uh, attempt was this Pioneer, those golden plates mounted at the Pioneer 10 and the Pioneer 11 spacecrafts in 1972 and 73. Here on the right, we can see how it is mounted at the spacecraft. Here an image of the spacecraft. Here again, that's the plates we have mounted on those spacecraft before we have sent them to space. The Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 spacecraft are, of course, were sent to space to collect information about our solar system and send it back to Earth. So that has been done. They have fulfilled their function, and now they are on the way to outer space. And we don't have contact to Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 anymore. So they have stopped sending signals to Earth, but they are on the way to outer space with these plates mounted on the spacecraft. Um, and that's the size of this plate is, it's not very big. It's just 22, 23 centimeters times 15 centimeters. And that's the message. And now, what is it telling, this message? Of course, we have here images of the humans on the right side. Then we have this star thing here in the middle, and then we have here those circles. And what do they mean? How do we expect the aliens to decode this message? Well, on the left side here, we have information about where we are, where the Earth, where they could find the Earth. So it's navigational information for extraterrestrials, where to find the Earth. So we have here in the center, that would be the Earth, and those lines here would be the distances to pulsars in the Milky Way, to pulsars in the Milky Way. And on those lines, there are coded the frequency of the pulsars. So we expect the aliens that they know what pulsars in our Milky Way mean, what pulsars are, and why they are so special, and how they could find them. And if they know where they are in the Milky Way, they could then find this, our little planet, the Earth. And on the bottom here, we see here on the left, the sun, and then we see the planets of our solar system, and here we see the way the spacecraft takes from Earth to outer space. And some interesting things about it, why it could, from my point of view, not work, not really work. And here on the top, we have a helium atom, which is which also we expect that they know the importance of helium atoms, because the frequency of helium atoms is also important to decode the message which is coded here in these distances. So they have to know the frequency of helium atoms to decode the message. And interesting, very anthropocentric things from my point of view are, which make the decoding uh, almost impossible, is, for example, here we see on the right side here, that's the eighth planet in our solar system, that was Pluto. Meanwhile, we have canceled Pluto as a planet. So Pluto no longer is a planet in our solar planet system. We have just crossed it out. At the moment, discussions are going on that they might have found another candidate which could be the eighth planet in our solar system. And other things are, for example, we have sent very simple images of humans, of what humans are, two humans, a man and a female. And for example, the discussion about man and female has completely changed within the last 50 years. Today, we are not even, we are discussing that there are, of course, more genders than just man and female. We have um, much more gender. So the gender discussion, for example, has completely changed, and we could, for example, think about what sort of image we would send today. The second example, which is even more interesting from my point of view, are the Voyager golden records, which were mounted on Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, just a few years later, 5 years later. And that's not plates, that's really records, golden records with information about our culture and about the Earth on it. And the lifetime of this records, it's estimated, should be approximately 500 million years. So we expect that these records can travel through space 500 million years and should still work if somebody would find it within this period. Here again, an image where is while the records are mounted at the spacecraft, and here we have an image of the backside of the of the record, and this backside of the record is interesting because it's somehow an instruction manual um, about how to use the record. So it's information manual, a manual for the aliens, how to what to do with this record. And here we see, for example, that the headphone, um, 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 to play the record, which is it's also mounted at the spacecraft. So the aliens also have this 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 sample device here to play the record. But of course, um, they have to build themselves the player. So they have to put the record in rotation, and they have to find out the right velocity, and then they get signals, and they have to, of course, to do the right thing with the signals. So here we can see the manual what they have to do. So it's coded here. It's coded how fast the the record should be rotated. And again, to calculate the rotation of the record, the velocity, uh, here again, a schematic image of the helium atom is used. So the aliens would have to know the frequency of the helium atoms and multiply it with the number that is encoded here on the border of the disk, and then with the right velocity, they will get signals. Here we see information on the right here about the sampling, the sampling direction of the signals. And if they put the sampling direction in the right order and sample it in the right order, uh, then they would get this image. And this image then is a signal. If they see this image, then it's a signal here that they have done the right thing. So that's interesting. That's an interesting sort of communication, and we don't really have theory, from my point of view, about these forms of communication. We have, for example, nowadays a lot of cryptography. So cryptography for me is the opposite. Cryptography means we try to have messages that could only be read by somebody who got the key to this message. So the messages are actually complicated, so much complicated that nobody should be able to read it. And here we have the opposite problem. We should code the message in a way that everybody, even in space, could read the message and make sense of it, which is the opposite problem. And to think about how it could work, those examples are very interesting from my point of view, because it's, for example, a stepwise thing. So we have sent something to space, they can do something with it. When they do the right things, then they get a result, and from that result, they could go on and make other steps and get other results. So those unfolding explanations, for example, of messages, those self-referential messages, where the message um, includes information about itself and develops and unfolds, has to unfold itself. That's a completely different problem, for example, than cryptography. So, and with the golden records, the Voyager golden records, they have tried to solve the problem in that way. From my point of view, I doubt that it will work, but you never know. Let's have a look about the content of the record, which, from my point of view, is also extremely interesting. So that's on these records, there are 116 analog images, 115 plus this test image with the circle. That signifies, okay, you have done the right thing. We can start now. And then we have 55 greetings in 55 different languages, greetings to the aliens, to the extraterrestrials. The German text is very boring. Herzliche Grüße an alle. And there are also files with wind, thunder, animal noises, and other things. And also 25 pieces of music are on the record. So I'm just going to play some of the greetings. So greetings in Arabic, for example, would sound like this.
تحياتنا للأصدقاء في النجوم يا ليت يجمعنا الزمان.
Or in Bengali.
Namaskar. Bishe Shanti Hok.
The German one, as I said, is quite
Herzliche
boring.
Grüße an alle.
I found interesting here the Chinese one, Friends of Space. How are you all? Have you eaten yet? Come visit us if you have time. I find this.
太空朋友，您好，您食饱未？有闲就来阮遮坐哦。
So we have 55 of those messages, and then there are a lot of images, which from my point of view are quite absurd. For example, images like this one, or this one, or this one. I don't really have an idea what we could, what sort of message we are sending if we send an image of a crocodile lying on its back being measured. I myself have never seen in real life such a situation, but we have sent it to space, or this chamber music situation, or this sunset image, or strange situations like this one. This is somehow a situation in a museum. And here we have a situation in a factory, or we have image like this where Quakers are constructing a house. So the interesting point here is, from my point of view, so those images are 50 years old, and we expect that they will be traveling thousands of years. Maybe nobody will find them anyway, but if they are found, we can expect that they will have been traveling thousands of years. And for me, even 50 years after we have sent them, they already look like being from a different culture. So I think today we would already send completely different images about our own culture. And here, the next I think I have to bit on the beer. I don't know what we are in. I think I have another few minutes. I will go to the Arecibo message. The Arecibo message, that's the third attempt I'm going to talk about a little bit, is an interstellar radio message carrying basic information about, even like the other ones, about humanity on Earth. It was sent to the globular star cluster M13. That's a star cluster far away, 25,000 light years away from us, sent in 1974. So all the three messages were sent in the 70s. And also this message is a little bit strange. It consists of 1,679 binary digits, so approximately, it's very short, approximately 200 centipoints from, it was only sent once with a certain frequency, with a certain energy. And if somebody will listen to this message, he will get, if he is able to make out of the signal really science, and if he knows what it means to make science of signals, then he would get a series of zeros and ones, or of two different signs, a series of two different signs, 1679 bits. And the only way to make sense out of this series of bits is that this receiver knows about mathematics, because this series of bits is meant to be read as an image. And to understand that it is meant to be an image, you need to know and have developed mathematics as we have developed it on Earth. Because what is expected is that the receiver thinks about the number of the bits, the 1679 bits, and then it makes click, and he is aware that this is a prime number, and that it is a prime number made out of the two factors, the factor 23 and 73. And then if the receiver rearranges the bits, knowing that it's prime numbers, he gets an image with 23 columns and 73 rows. And then, not earlier, then it can see this image, and we again have then a very coded, a very cryptic image sending information about us. For example, in the headline here, that is a binary system. So the first column is a 1, the second column is a 2. If you know binary coding, then you could read it. So the white spaces mean a 1, and the black spaces mean a 0. So here we have a 1, we have a 2, we have a 3, and we have this baseline here that signifies just that it's the baseline and the direction we have to read it. And I really doubt that anyone could make, and there is more complex information herein about humans, about the double helix, about nucleotides, and even I knowing exactly what binary numbers are wouldn't have been able to decode this first line here. So then what does that, those attempts all mean to us? So I think we can read those messages from an anthropocentric viewpoint, and questioning those anthropocentric presuppositions. And then it's from my point of view at least, getting interesting, because then we think about ourselves and our prejudices. For example, just a few examples about that side. So all those images expect that the extraterrestrials use sight to understand things. So sight is very crucial in those messages. But for example, the linguist Sherry Wells Jensen says it's unlikely that aliens have a sense of sight. Why? Because, for example, planets, not the Earth, but a lot of planets orbit around red dwarf stars, and the planets always face this means that the planets always face the same side down its Earth, its sun, and then on those planets life would only be possible in the twilight regions, and in those twilight regions side wouldn't be so important. So that's a way of abstracting things and presuppositions. So then we can formulate from starting from this more general um, imaginations about our messages that would really make sense to send it to space. So extraterrestrial beings might perceive and conceptualize their reality, of course, in ways completely different to ours, using different cognitive categories, or even uh, are not communicating through visual and acoustic channels, for example. And maybe the nature of time for different, if you live in different environments, if you think of different life species, is of course also completely different. So time, for example, could mean to them something completely different than time means to us. It's not a one-dimensional understanding of time, for example. And maybe, of course, science and technology are just not needed in different environments. So we can't, of course, be sure that uh, extraterrestrial beings did have a need to develop science and technology. Maybe the environments are so different that completely different things come up in their, what we could call their culture. But interesting, and that shows actually the way the things go. The SETI program started really just with physics and astronomers. So it started in the 70s with just them. But today, um, they also have their sociologists, they have archaeologists, they have anthropologists, they have the humanities also included, because they have learned just to look at it from a physicist's point of view doesn't, of course, make sense. So, for example, they have learned a lot from archaeologists, because archaeologists always had a problem to decipher we have found about our culture and make sense out of it. So the hieroglyphs, for example, the question, the basic question behind those thinking about uh, more general forms of life and more general forms of cognition and perception, and also things is the question of, are there really something that we could call cognitive universals in the universe? That's the question. And this question, of course, is completely unanswered. So language, of course, needs, if we want to communicate in language, it needs shared reference points. So the question is, what could be shared reference points between aliens and humans? What could be the basis, what we could expect they also know? And what we always hear is mathematics, of course, could be the basis. So for example, this mathematician, for example, has developed a language called Linkers, which is based on pure logic and pure mathematics, and he has developed it to communicate with aliens already in the 60s. And we expect, for example, prime numbers, the number pi, Fibonacci series, that they all would have to know if they if they are intelligent, that's the message. If they are intelligent, we expect that they know this. I would doubt that. I think that mathematics is to a certain point a human invention, and we can't expect that that a different culture would really develop the exactly um, same mathematics, or would expect develop the exactly same physics and so on. But the question really is, and that's discussed in this paper here, which is here mentioned, a paper by Lemarchand and Lambert, Universal Cognitive Maps and the search for intelligent life. They speak of four cognitive universals, and they would expect that there are not only mathematics and physical, technological universals, they would say that there are also aesthetic and ethic spiritual universals. So that's an open, of course, discussion. And I would like to close my talk now with just two examples. So I think um, what we could do here, but what really could be interesting is to open up speculation and to open up the field for real imagination. What, of course, has been done in the science fiction literature, but of course, in the science fiction literature, it's always about a story. It's always about a narrative, and I would say that the things we are discussing here are not always fit into narratives. So it's a little bit a different direction. So, for example, just to show how the discussions and directions could be opened and could be also useful for our questions, which we are dealing in other fields in our sciences on Earth, is, for example, the question of is it only about intelligence? So the communication, the extraterrestrial communication, only speaks about intelligence, for example. They never speak about consciousness. So the question, of course, is uh, do we expect from aliens to have consciousness, self-consciousness? Is it necessary to establish an intelligent communication, or is it not? So, and here, for example, it could be helpful to look at a French philosopher, Raymond Raya. He he talks about three forms of consciousness, and they are built up on each other. So the lowest form of consciousness for him would be material entities at a molecular state, so organic things, organic tissue, and that those organic tissue uh, is is in a self-revelation relation to itself, and he speaks of self-enjoyment. So this very basic form of an organic entity sensing itself, it's the lowest form for him. Only on this we can build other forms of consciousness, for example, a form 2, which entities with motor schemes or animals, with perception, with schematizing consciousness, and so on. That what we see in animals, and the form 3, language, science, system, techniques, which we at the moment find only in humans, um, would be the third form. And for example, interesting, if you look at those things, we would see that, for example, our attempts to develop artificial intelligence on Earth, they only build on form 2 and form 3, so robotics and neural nets and also things. They only are based on form 2 and form 3. But following Raymond Raya, he would say you could never reach to develop a conscious entity without having also realized form 1. So that leads to strange images like that. We of course could establish a communication with outer space with a form of artificial intelligence as we have it on Earth, uh, only based on form 2 and form 3, without being conscious um, of what it is sending. For example, if we are at the point where we really can imagine that we can imagine a world still running technology in it, but without humans. We are not so far from that. We are really developing technologies that are self-maintaining and self further developing. A very strange thing, but we are not so far away from it. And if then the humans are extinct on Earth, we would have, for example, sending technologies, messages to the space and receiving and sending back without any consciousness included in it. A very strange and absurd thing. And another last example, that's the last slide. Another interesting experiment that also goes in that direction, that comes from a very different field, but also points in this direction, is an article by Cording and Jonas. The question, could a neuroscientist understand a microprocessor? That's a question not so far away from the questions we are dealing with when we think about communication with extraterrestrials. So that's a very artificial situation here. Of course, we know, because we built microprocessors, we know how they work, but the experiment goes in a different direction. They say, let's use, so neuroscientists try to understand the human brain. They try to understand what's going on in us as in the human brain. And they use those methods and try to understand what's going on in a microprocessor. And the conclusion is actually using the methods of today of neuroscientists, and so the methods are actually measuring and have a lot of data about what's going on in the brain and having models, and then try to find out how the brain works. And if we would do the same thing with a microprocessor, with the methodologies of neuroscientists, we would never find, we would never find out how microprocessors work. And that's an interesting thing. So that helps us, of course. So we need actually very different methods and new methodologies to understand ourselves and to understand our brain. And I think those very far away and absurd attempts to communicate with extraterrestrials could, as say, open the field, the speculative field and the imagination. They really could help us to learn more about ourselves. So that's the end of my talk. Thanks.
So thank you so much, Georg, for the speech. It was very interesting, very enticing. And also it was very nice how you dealt with our trolls. I'm gonna ask, I apologize for that once again. Now we're gonna be extra careful about who is going in the room of the meeting. So we still have some minutes for questions and commentaries. So would anyone like to say anything, or maybe I should read some of the things that were stated during the talk? I don't know. So I will comment briefly what was said that I think might be interesting. Rosangela was saying about a radio signal detected in 2019 coming from near Proxima Centauri. And Lauren was saying that it is interesting how it is dated by technology and culture, this way that we attempt to communicate with extraterrestrials. Sergio was saying that nowadays we would send memes for sure. And so does anybody else want to say anything or ask anything?
I'd like to make a comment. I think what's interesting in this talk is that the idea to try to reach extraterrestrial intelligence made us ask questions about ourselves that we also have to speculate a lot to understand. And one of the things I think at the end of the talk, the problem of consciousness is the great question. If we are immersed in a field of consciousness. So probably the channel to communicate with the external extraterrestrial intelligence could be another channel, not the temporal space continuum, but a lower reality of the quantum field, whereas there is no problem of time and space. And a lot of speculations is possible, but I think the most important is that what is consciousness? What is it? What make us feel and be spectators of ourselves? That's the question. I think technology slowly made a lot of difference in thousands of years since the beginning of cultural events in the caves to until now. We developed a kind of expanded consciousness, and when we understand and we can make more clever questions about ourselves. But these ones are very interesting. Why we cannot talk with them? Because probably we don't know ourselves.
So, Georg, would you like to comment, or should we?
No. It's consciousness is of course a big problem, and this also discussed a lot in philosophy at the moment, as you of course know. And I think it's really to use this abstract scenario of communicating with extraterrestrial, which is an abstract scenario because we are not communicating, really can help to understand the problems we really have there. So that's really and you got that very well. That's the point for me actually, yeah. And it also helps to see that that we didn't. I think we haven't understood the importance of the biological basis of our being, and that artificial intelligence. It's not clear. We don't know exactly whether it is possible to have other forms of consciousness which are not biologically based. We don't know. But that's a question, of course. And that's a very deep philosophical question, but nobody really has a final answer for that. But of course, in artificial intelligence, there are people who say we are almost there, and of course, it's possible. But they don't have really arguments against other very deep philosophical problems that are involved in that question.
Thank you.
Shall I free the window, or do you need? I think you need it for the next.
Yeah. So, well, Lauren was. I don't know if we have time to answer our last question, or Lauren was asking Georg what would be the best way to send a message to outer space, in his opinion.
Essa foi ótima, Lauren.
I don't know. I think it's really hopeless because expecting that message traveling thousands of years, I surely in 10 years would be ashamed myself what I have sent, and would in 10 years anyway send a different message. So I think it's really a question of the moment, as we have seen in the messages we have sent in the 70s. Today we would already send completely different things. They are outdated. They will travel thousands of years, but they are already outdated from our point of view some years later. And that's the charming thing about it. I like it. I mean, that's also the charming thing about it.
Eu tenho uma sugestão. I have a suggestion. We have to learn to use the quantum field to send messages.
Yeah, of course. That's another thing. We don't really know whether the speed of light traveling of messages will hold in the future, will be really that's other very interesting involved questions. How long are our laws of nature valid? Because we have somehow invented them, and they are our explanations. They are not the nature itself. So at the moment, it's actually not so clear whether this law will be valid forever. That messages can't travel faster than the speed of light.
I'm joking, but I am serious about this because I think that we must consider the possibility to make these questions, because otherwise there's no answer. You have to create possibilities to solve this problem. I think the kind of fictionalize is the solution. Even science today is becoming progressively inquisitive. They also are dealing with questions they don't have an answer. The problem of dark matter, dark energy, is more than a half of the universe. We don't know what is. We know the matter, but dark matter, we don't know what is dark energy. And so they make questions. I think the time is now to make silly questions.
I think you are right insofar as what it really challenges, thinking about those things, what it really challenges is the border of our imaginations. How far can we go with our imaginations?
I think so.
And can we really imagine what is really possible in the universe, or are we just too narrow-minded to really be able to imagine what's possible out there?